Alicia. I'm the head of policy and strategic initiatives for the Chamber, and on behalf of Jim Rooney, our CEO, and our Women's Network Board Chair, Susan Penta, we're thrilled to have you with us today for this conversation. I always like to begin these, so this is the first one of our 30th anniversary year. So the Women's Network has now existed since 1994, and we're kicking off our 30th anniversary, so we're thrilled to have you all for this conversation. I do like to start them all with a quick show of hands. If this is your first Women's Network event, could you just put up your hand so you have a sense? Wow. So thank you all for being here. I hope you take the time to connect with the advisory board members in the room. They have yellow tags on their name tags. And just start to build your network. Come to these. We host them almost monthly. Think about you and your career. On a related note, the Chamber Foundation recently put out a survey of 20 to 30-year-olds in the region, so Greater Boston more broadly, and it showed that a quarter of 20 to 30-year-olds plan to leave Greater Boston in the next 5 years, with housing and transportation being the two most important factors. However, another huge factor was those who said that they were most likely to leave the region said they had a hard time building community. So invest in that. There is a reason why we have a women's network. And I will also emphasize, of those who have the hardest time building community, there were two groups, Black women and LGBTQIA plus individuals. So think a little bit about that and how you're nurturing your network today after this conversation. So I'll get us started very quickly because I'm thrilled to be here. So Stephanie Lee and Congresswoman Pressley, who you'll hear from her a while, is thinking, all right, policy is her love language. I love policy. And something that I'm looking forward to is featuring two people. All three of us have a commonality. We have all been big champions for women and women who have gone through gender-based violence and survivors throughout our lifetimes, which is incredibly important. So thank you both for your advocacy on that behalf. And with that, I just want to say thank you to Verizon for hosting us today. It's a beautiful view, even with the rain. Thank you all for making it. And now I'm thrilled to introduce Kathleen Finn, who's been a longtime advisory board member and supporter of the Women's Network, and she'll kick us off. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Celia. And let's have a round of applause for all the Chamber team who is here today. Raise your hand if you're from the Chamber. The Chamber is such an important institution for us here in Boston. We can't take it for granted. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So it's such a pleasure to host everyone here at Verizon's Hub on Causeway. And we really see this as a home to innovation and inspiration. And we couldn't bring a more inspiring speaker to you today than the special speaker that we have. Verizon is committed to diversity and inclusion, and our efforts include a focus on advancing female professionals. In fact, our Women's Employee Resource Group has just launched a new global professional development program to empower women and their allies with the knowledge, skills, and strategies to thrive in today's evolving workplace. And we're also proud to partner with the Chamber. And the Chamber is really working to make Greater Boston the best place for professional women to thrive through its network. How many people love that word thrive? How many people are feeling thriving this morning? And now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's featured speaker, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and Stephanie Lee, who will be moderating today's conversation. I'll begin with introducing our Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley, Massachusetts 7th District. As we celebrate Women's History Month, we can't begin the conversation without noting the historical milestones that Congresswoman Pressley has achieved in her career. Congresswoman Pressley is an activist, a legislator, a survivor, the first woman of color to be elected to Congress from this Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and prior to being elected to Congress, she was the first woman of color to be elected to our Boston City Council. Can I hear some applause for Throughout her career, Congresswoman Pressley has fought to ensure, and I'm sure you've heard her say this, that those who are closest to the pain are closest to the power, giving and informing policy making. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley as a Boston resident. I have had the pleasure of voting for you many times, both putting you in the city council and in the Congress of this United States. And
so you have her to blame.
So you have I get the credit and the blame. And I also want to introduce today's moderator. It's our very own Stephanie Lee, Vice President, New England State and Local Government Affairs at Verizon. Nearing almost 19 years at Verizon, Stephanie is responsible for driving the company's public policy, strategic government affairs, community engagement, and corporate social responsibility initiatives in the region. Under Stephanie's leadership, our team is committed to creating a digitally inclusive and equitable society by ensuring that more people have access to broadband connectivity. Stephanie is also my boss and partner in good trouble. And with that, I will hand it over to Stephanie.
All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
That was a little too tepid for Women's History Month. Okay, well, we'll try that again. Good morning. Good morning. All right, good to be with you.
Love it. It's not every day that we get to host an icon,
Oh my gosh.
really, in human rights. It's such a pleasure and an honor. I had all these remarks, but I just am going to go from the heart.
Yeah.
And I remember when you first were elected to the city council, and I was working as a younger manager at Verizon, and I was responsible for building relationships with the city council. And I was just always, I knew when I first met you, keep an eye on her. She's going places. You always, what always struck me wasn't what you were doing around policy or what you were doing around the community. Those are all amazing things, and your unwavering commitment is second to none. But it was your authenticity, your true, how you spoke truth to power. You tackled issues that in a political setting 15 years ago, people didn't always openly talk about. And I think about things like gender-based violence, for example, and having served on the board of Jane Doe, our coalition against domestic violence and sexual assault. That was an issue that wasn't always easy to get support for. And people like you gave survivors a voice. And because of that, it is an issue that we've brought light to. And we have a lot of work still to do in that arena, but there are more voices. So I want to thank you as a woman who came in and is a first in many ways, but you cracked that glass ceiling, and so many are following behind you. As you can see, look at the Boston City Council now. Look at the leadership in the state of Massachusetts. I'm sure there's still work to be done. We live a little bit in a bubble, I think, here in Massachusetts. But what I want to talk to you a little bit about, you've just celebrated 5 years in Congress. You're 15 years in public service. What motivates you and inspires you? I'd love to just hear in your own words, because you are a beacon of hope and inspiration for so many, but what gives you that light to do this work?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to say thanks to Verizon. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here today. And in the spirit of authenticity, I'll offer my apologies for being a little tardy. First of all, I'm in full-on menopause, and so I just wanted to offer that. You know, hey, you're barely out of the house, you're getting dressed, and you're like, it is 1,000 degrees. Also, I made the mistake of, dressing after I overdone my face, and I got makeup all over because as an alopecia, I put makeup on my head. So no one needs to tell me there's makeup all over the back of my shirt. I'm well aware. Okay. But what inspires me? People have heard me say this many times before. I just have to give credit where credit is due. Certainly, my mother, may she rest in peace and power, has shaped me in formidable ways. And that is because as an only child, my mother and I'm very fortunate because I was able to see my mother's humanity and to see her as a woman. before I even saw her as my mother. A lot of children have to become adults before they see the humanity in their parents. But because it was sort of my mother and I, not sort of, it was my mother and I versus the world, I was there to comfort her through heartbreak, through hardship. I saw the ways in which her untreated traumas manifested in different ways in our lives. My mother was a survivor of domestic violence, and so I experienced the secondary trauma of constantly intervening, trying to keep her safe. My mother was a survivor of sexual assault. She was a survivor of intrafamily sexual abuse. My mother trained and mentored white men that were promoted over her and paid more than her. My mother couldn't afford childcare, and so at a very young age, I was at home alone, maybe even as young as 5 or 6, and she would just tell me to not tell anyone that I was home alone because she was afraid they would take me away from her. My mother struggled with fibroids, and the pain that she experienced from uterine fibroids was often delegitimized by healthcare providers. My mother had a radical hysterectomy far too young in life and had not fully recovered from that hysterectomy and went to work anyway, collapsed on the street and was taken away by ambulance. I lived all those things because the things that I fight for, paid leave, childcare for survivors, pay equity, again, survivors' justice, maternal justice, healthcare justice, for the ERA. All of these things are things that I champion because I've been proximate to them. But moreover, in my own life, in my transition from girl to woman, those things that plagued my mother were perpetuated in my own life. And that has everything to do with what I would characterize as policy violence, systemic inequities and indignities that women endure and tolerate. And I don't want that future for my 15-year-old daughter, Cora. I don't want her conflating those inequities, those indignities, those injustices with what it means to be girl or woman. And so that is what inspires me. Some people have heard me recently tell the story about having organized in indigenous community. I went to Minnesota to stop a pipeline. And it was my first time organizing on a reservation. And as I was leaving, one of the elder indigenous people stopped me and said, as you leave here, strive to be a better ancestor than descendant. And that call has not left me. Every day I'm asking myself, am I truly being a better ancestor than descendant? Every day I'm just wanting to do the work of delivering a love letter to future generations, and to do that in policy. And I'll just close this and say, as a Black woman especially, I think we navigate this dichotomy of being hyper visible. I'm a Black, bald woman, very intentional about how I show up. Just how I present is disrupted. So I feel hyper visible. I feel policed. As Black women, our hair is criminalized, our bodies are criminalized, we're surveyed, we're profiled disproportionately. But we're also hyper invisible. Our contributions erased or maybe a footnote. Our pain delegitimized to the extent that it costs us our lives when you look at the Black maternal morbidity crisis. So my mother's lived experiences, being proximate to them, those same experiences being compounded by my own lived experiences, and then the world that I want to shape for all of our daughters.
Wow, that's you live it, you personify everything. You're saying everything you give back to the community is amazing. We'll touch upon that in a minute. But I wanted to talk about a recent study that came out. Wallet Hub and CBS News announced that Massachusetts was ranked the best state for women, noting that we finished first in the subcategory of women's health and safety. Now clearly we have a little bit of a bubble here, but there's still, based on a lot of what you're saying, Massachusetts, not all women have an equal experience here, an equitable experience here. But what is your vision to improve upon that? We can't rest on those laurels, because clearly living here, we're proud of all we've accomplished and the progress, but there's still more to be done. And then how does that compare to what you're seeing in Congress and other parts of the country, where sometimes it feels like a lot of times it feels like we've taken steps 50 years back? A lot to unpack.
Sure. All right, well, okay, if you think about Congress, often we tout the fact that this is the most representative Congress in the history of Congress. That's true, right? I was recently at the Washington, D.C. National screening of the movie Shirley, which is now streaming on Netflix. And the first Black woman elected to Congress. I encourage you all to watch it. And she was the first, and there have been a little over 11,000 people to serve in the history of Congress. 56 Black women. 56. And over 11,000 in all these many years, right? So we have the most representative and diverse Congress in the history of Congress. However, we still don't have parity. And that's how I think about the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we never want to give short shrift or shirk the strides that have been made, because we have made tremendous strides. My election is evidence of that. Each and every one of you in your respective roles is evidence of that. Many of you are likely the first or the second in whatever it is that you're doing. Again, happy Women's History Month, because sometimes I think we are only celebrating those who have made history that is recorded. But each of us are makers and shapers of history, whether we are recorded in a book or not. And so, again, I thank each and every one of you for your contributions. So I think we have unprecedented representation in our college presidents, in nonprofit, in private sector. So there's been, nonprofit, great strides, but we don't have parity. And this is what I think is the challenge with buying into this idea of sort of Northeast exceptionalism, which we can all be victim to, if you will, because we have been the pace setters in so many ways. And we could think that we are exempt from some of the things that might plague red states, if you will. And that can lull us into a complacency. And so I think it's important that we remain vigilant in the work of leadership parity. We all benefit from that. When I was first elected to the Boston City Council, people would ask me, who suffered before you were elected? African Americans or women? And I would always say everyone, right? Because everyone is better served by a government that is more reflective and representative of the citizenry. You need people at the table that are going to call the question, for the disability community, for the LGBT community, for more mature women, for younger women, for women of every race, ethnicity, and cultural experience. You need people to call the question, whether you're in public or private sector, because if you don't do that, the solutions and the issues being raised will be completely monolithic and homogenized. So if you don't have different people around the table, different questions are not called. And so I just think it's important that we not become complacent, we remain vigilant. Just because what we're seeing in the Commonwealth right now is unprecedented. I mean, we have a governor and lieutenant governor, that are both women. And again, in my district alone, I have 3 female mayors. In Cambridge, Somerville, and in Boston, respectively. So strides have been made, but we have to remain vigilant. And I really appreciate your lifting up that survey. I mean, so that is indicative of our progress, that we ask those questions now. We didn't used to ask those questions, so we really want to know. But now then we have to commit ourselves to the work after the headlines have faded. And that's something that I find in Congress a lot as well, that when something is commanding front page news, people are more vested in advancing policies and budgets that address that issue. But when the headlines fade, so too does the commitment, so too do the resources. DEI is a perfect example of this right now. I mean, we are defunding actively right now in a Republican majority anything that is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in any event, yeah. So I feel, encouraged. I feel grateful to call the Commonwealth my home. I owe the city of Boston everything. It completely changed the trajectory of my life. And as I said, tremendous strides have been made across the board, but we have to remain vigilant and not get lulled into a complacency because we are Massachusetts. Because we have a responsibility. If we are Massachusetts, then we should be a pace setter.
Right.
We should be a pace setter for the nation. We should be piloting and be a petri dish of innovation and truly be an example.
Thank you for that. And I have a follow-up on that because I think often we as citizens or people living in the United States or our city turn to our public officials and think they're supposed to solve all our problems. We also get all our blame, right? If you can't solve the problem or it's easy to point the finger. We all have to be responsible for ourselves, but there's a role too that business can play. And here you are today at the Boston Chamber of Commerce in a room full of women leaders and some men leaders who are allies and
Who have sense enough to be here.
Yes, there's been
Let's just give it up for the men in the room.
Yeah.
We love you, we appreciate you.
But what more can business do to help us continue to progress as a society and provide equitable opportunity for everybody living in our society?
So first I want to pick up on the point that you made there about people in government being blamed for everything.
That was not in my script.
Look, I just want to offer this, and it's one of my favorite. Stacey Abrams is a dear friend, and so I have the good fortune of being in her company to benefit from her wisdom often. But one of my favorite sort of edicts or things that she's said is that we don't elect saviors, we elect partners. And I just want to leave that with everyone because as a voter, that's something I have to remind myself of too. We do not elect saviors, you elect partners. So when you go into a voting booth to participate in a municipal, state, or federal election, think about who you want to be your partner. And part of partnership is accountability. Which is also why I don't mind people asking me hard questions or being critical, because I do want to be held accountable. So I just want to offer that. When it comes to the private sector, or even just people as private citizens, something that my mother instilled in me early on, who was a proud Democrat, a super voter, and took me with her to vote in every single election. This is a relationship that is symbiotic. And so how I characterize that now as an elected myself is this practice of cooperative governing. So I don't cast a vote, write a bill, co-sponsor a bill without enlisting those closest to the pain. When I was elected to Congress and had my official swearing in Washington, D.C., which my dear sister friend Danella was there, I had a ceremonial swearing in at Roxbury Community College, and it was 400 strong, and we took an oath, a pledge that I had authored with some leaders in community. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted to make the point that you sent me to Washington, but your work isn't done. We really have to cooperatively govern and be in symbiotic partnership. And so I had the 400 plus people that came to Roxbury Community College take a pledge as well. Because we have to do this work together. The private sector, specifically, one, I do invite and welcome the private sector to continue to call the question with your elected officials, to make sure that we're aware of your perspective, so we're carrying that when we're crafting policies as well. As far as those things that unilaterally are in your power, I want to really, celebrate those who have offered things like student loan offset. the student loan debt crisis, which for those of you who know policies, my loved ones, which have been following my word, I've been the lead negotiator in the House to the White House, working very closely with Senator Warren and Chuck Schumer on this issue for probably almost 3 years now. And although the Supreme Court did overturn the will of the people and obstruct that executive action that we fought for, that would have benefited 43 million borrowers, we continue to make great strides in targeted relief. And we're not done fighting. There's what we call a negotiated rulemaking process happening right now, which I'm very involved in, as we look for an alternative way around the Supreme Court's obstruction to deliver this game-changing relief. But I want you to understand there are people that are paying a student loan payment that is the equivalency of a mortgage. And this is not just a millennial or Gen Z issue. I have women, 65, 70 years old, who are still paying on loans. I have elder women on fixed incomes who have had their benefits garnished because they defaulted on loans. And not only is it an economic justice issue, it's a racial justice issue, it's a gender justice issue. This is a $2 trillion crisis, and 2/3 of this debt are disproportionately on the shoulders of women. It's a racial justice issue because Black students and Latino students borrow and default at higher rates. And that's not because we don't work as hard. It's because our families don't have generational wealth. So even if there have been gains in income, we don't have generational wealth. And that is because of every major federal relief program in this country, Black Americans have been locked out of. From the Homestead Act to the GI Bill and targeted by redlining. So I would love for the private sector to offer those student loan offsets. That makes a big difference in putting money back in people's pockets. Same thing with childcare. So here you have Massachusetts, 5th most expensive state in the country, and top 3 Boston expensive cities in the country to live. And then on top of that, depending on the year, we're 2nd or 3rd in the most expensive state for childcare. So you have families that are paying anywhere from $17,000 to $20,000 a year, which is the equivalency of an in-state tuition. Yeah, $17,000 to $20,000 a year. That's the equivalency of in-state tuition. So if you can provide on-site child care or subsidies or things like that, all those things, I think child care is as much about the GDP as it is about our families. I thought the pandemic, we keep saying the pandemic made all these things plain. Well, what the hell are you gonna do about it? It's like, oh, it made all these things plain, and it worsened all these things. So you're just gonna default to an unjust status quo? What are the lessons you learned during the pandemic? All of a sudden there was this innovation, all these things we said could never be done, we found a way to do. And now we're like, oh, I know, let's just pull everything back. If people did not learn during a pandemic that child care is a workforce issue, is a GDP issue, I don't know what to tell you. And that is also about our competitiveness, because we know all the data and all the ways in which it supports how that dictates the trajectory of a child's life, their health outcomes, their wealth, all of those things. So those are some of the things that I would love for the private sector to continue to think about. That is about inclusion, that is about equity, because we experience a brain drain in professional environments when women can't manage those things. The other issue, I'm 50, so the sandwich generation. Women are really, it's our families are managing these responsibilities of aging parents and still, young children, but all these things fall mostly on women. So even though they're not gender issues, they're family issues, those things, and I was a caregiver, myself, these things, mostly fall on women. And then finally, I would just ask everyone, it's not just about a report where you get to say, we have more women. Where are those women? And what are they getting paid? Where are they? So are they all in entry-level roles? Does anyone have autonomy? Are they in leadership roles? Are they a board of directors? Are you in a position where the women in your company can have equity in that company? These are the sorts of questions we need to be asking ourselves. So look at every table and ask yourself, who isn't there? And then be intentional, because that's the thing, the work of inclusion and diversity, it is 5 more phone calls, 20 more emails, 10 more meetings, but it is worth it to be intentional in that way.
Well, I think there's a lot we can do, and you have all the leaders sitting in the room here, and we continue also to try to build off of the success of Massachusetts. But you're right, there's a lot of work. You know, we're almost victims of our success because it is so expensive here. And we heard what Celia said, when people are leaving the state, and it doesn't matter if it's the healthiest, safest state for women, if people can't afford to be here, right? That erodes their ability to stay here. So yes, lots of work to do.
Yeah, all those things, and I want to say, I'm trying to support you all with my work in transportation in particular, and housing, and childcare, student debt. All of these things are connected. We can't address any of those things in silos. You can do the great work, but if people can't navigate a city, if transportation isn't accessible, rapid, reliable, all of those things impact.
Yes, and I will thank you for your support on the Tax Relief for Americans and Family Workers Act that helped restore the child tax credit, but also extended 100% expense for capital investment that incents companies like Verizon to continue to invest in infrastructure to bring critical services.
So thank you for saying that. That was on my list, and I was remiss to offer.
Thank you. I
So
had it was early on.
Yeah, good looking out, good looking out.
I'm getting sort of the warning that it's not time for me quite to go yet,
Okay.
but I want to open it up and offer
Sure.
the audience to ask a couple of questions. And I just wanted to know, we have a couple of young people here, Northeastern Co-op students that work for Verizon. And I think one of you has a question. Nalina, if you could introduce yourself and ask the first question.
Hi, my name is Nalina John. I go to Northeastern University, and I'm currently in the 5G Engineering Co-op at Verizon. So I was wondering...
Okay.
So I was wondering, what are some of the struggles you encounter in your day-to-day life? Specifically, how do you navigate working in a male-dominated field, especially as a woman who's a minority?
Thank you. I appreciate that. The truth of the matter is that I've been navigating those spaces for a very long time. I've been in Congress 5 years. I was on the City Council 8 years. I was an aide to United States Senator John Kerry 11 years. I was an aide to Congressman Joseph P. Kennedy II for 4.5 years. You know, as an office that I worked in as an unpaid intern, working 3 jobs, and that was 25 plus years ago, and now I'm the Congresswoman for that office that I interned in 25 plus years ago. So that internship or co-op completely changed the trajectory of my life. So I have a feeling I might be working for you one day. So I would say in terms of, you know, male-dominated environments, so my reality for a long time has been that I was, at that time, usually the youngest in the room, one of very few women, and also the only person of color in a lot of those spaces. So I think I've built up the muscle. I don't want to say resilience, because I think we romanticize resilience. I think that's very overrated, because resilience comes from hardship, you know? But yeah, I built the muscle, so I'm used to navigating it. Some of my coping mechanisms, I stay offline. Honestly, I think the biggest threat to my staying focused on what I needed to remain focused on, a threat to my mental health, a great distraction, unfortunately, is a lot of the vitriol, venom, the death threats, the bullying, the trolling that I get online. I mean, we already know what our young girls manage, right? And I'm a 50-year-old, completely, I think, well-adjusted, grown woman. And some of what is thrown at me online, you know, has really broken me. And not only for being bullied for my disability, but also for my race. My faith is very important to me, so that is certainly something that covers me, that anchors me. And then I have cohorts, some of my closest friends in Congress, my sisters in Congress, who unfortunately when we first came to Congress, we trauma bonded. We were all sort of dealing with the same level of incoming because we're all first. And as our Vice President Kamala Harris reminds us, when you break ceilings, you get cut. And so that's how, so I guess the synopsis would be, I've been doing this a long time, I've built the muscle. I rely on my faith, and I also rely on my sisterhood. Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is someone who's done a lot of work on trauma, and I don't want you all to leave out of the trauma space the growing political violence towards women. It's next level right now. But I remember when I was on the city council doing a hearing, one of the 7 that I did on trauma, and I asked the psychologist, what's the chief combatant of trauma? And they said to inform joy. And so I'm very intentional about that as well.
I think we'd like to take at least
Okay.
another question.
I'll be brief.
Okay, great.
I'm the daughter of a Baptist, granddaughter of a Baptist preacher, so you know. Oh my goodness, how are you?
I am doing very well, and Congresswoman, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to talk a little bit more about generational wealth and how housing and housing policy can affect that. I know that you're doing so much work in that area, and if you could just expand on that a little bit, that would be terrific.
Yeah. So I serve on the Financial Services Committee. I also serve on the Committee on Oversight and Reform. In the work of financial services, that covers everything from consumer protection to student debt, to housing, to homelessness. And in my opinion, housing policy is everything. And we are very behind in terms of the federal investment that needs to be made in housing. You know, I certainly, I'm grateful for everyone here. I love everybody, so I don't mean to be partisan, but if you'll give me one moment. On the Financial Services Committee, a committee that previously was chaired by Maxine Waters when Democrats had the gavel, we had 55 hearings on housing. Most of them on the need for more housing that was affordable. In the 118th Congress, we have had 1 hearing on housing, 1. So, you know, I did a teletown hall with about 2,500 constituents recently, and housing was the first, second, and third issue. So housing is everything. It's how we meet our sustainability goals, it's how we meet our transit justice goals, it's how we meet our economic and racial justice goals. We have a $10 trillion racial wealth gap problem in this country. And that is a problem for everyone, and it breaks very hard along gender lines and people representing multiple marginalized identities. Housing is a determinant of health. It's also, you know, wealth outcomes, so it is everything. But I would also just say, Joanne, that's also why I'm so focused on student debt cancellation, because we have found for the 4 million Americans that have benefited from the targeted relief, that they've been able to use those saved monies towards becoming first-time homeowners. And that is so critical to building equity and that generational wealth. The one other policy I would lift up is my baby bonds bill, which Treasurer Goldberg is piloting here, and we have had, it's a bill I introduced with Cory Booker. We're fighting to get it done federally, but in the meanwhile, we have had states like Illinois and Connecticut, California that are piloting it, and it is a baby bond of $1,000 at birth for those in the lowest socioeconomic brackets. Over the next 18 years, Treasury pays deposits into that bond, and we have projections of that being anywhere from $18,000 to $24,000. And here's the key: when that person withdraws those funds, and they can do that, or they can allow them to continue to accrue interest, they can only spend those funds in 3 ways. You can spend it to purchase a home, you can spend it to start a business, or you can spend it in pursuit of higher education. And so I think it's policies like that, targeted policies like that, married with a robust investment in housing and addressing, you know, lending disparities and all of those different things that will help us address the racial wealth gap, the gender gap as well, and allow more people to build wealth.
Thank you, Ayanna. Do we have time for one more? Okay, one last question on this side of the room.
And I do want to say in Congress, in the Build Back Better bill, which unfortunately in its full strength died And an iteration of that became the Inflation Reduction Act, which has been game-changing in lowering the cost of prescription drugs and making investments in climate resiliency. There was a $150 billion investment in Build Back Better for housing. So when that bill died, so too did that investment.
Hi, I'd love to know, with all of the so many issues going on right now, why has Congress focused on banning TikTok that so many people use to build businesses, make income? Like, why is that a focus?
So I think it's important. I'm going to parse words a little bit here. Congress is not focused on that. A Republican majority, which determines what are the priorities, so you write a bill and there's a process to get that bill to committee, to get that bill reported out of committee, to then get that vote, that bill to the floor. And so whoever holds the gavel determines what you're going to prioritize. And so in my opinion, this Congress has been anti-woman, anti-worker, anti-immigrant, undemocratic. I voted no on that TikTok ban, mostly because, one, I do appreciate the role that it plays in terms of commerce for so many of our small business owners, and I don't think we should be targeting TikTok. I think that there are regulations definitely that we need to take into account, both from a national security concern, data harvesting, privacy, but we should not be targeting TikTok. We should be asking these questions and making those demands of big tech across the board and not just TikTok. So I do want to say that in my opinion, those are not the things we should be focused on when we have a housing crisis, when there are attacks on our bodily autonomy, when there are so many other issues of consequence that each and every one of you care about. I think it is disconnected from those things that are really top of mind for everyday people and what we should be working on. But we have to vote on what comes to the floor, and that's how I voted.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, our time is up, but you were able to really share a lot and give us some great perspective on how you think, what motivates you, but more importantly, what you're accomplishing. We look forward to continuing to partner with you, and we hope that you will call upon the business community and us as individuals wherever we can help. We are very proud to have you representing us. And I also just wanted to note before we go that Congresswoman Pressley has brought a lot of federal funds back into the district, which we're really proud of. The community project funding, which covers the waterfront, I added up $32 million over the last 3 years.
That's right.
Just $10 million just this year.
So community project funding, this used to be called earmarks.
Yeah.
And I love community project funding because it is the best partnership between government. It is, the solutions are community driven, but government endorsed and invested. So the money that we've brought back, everything from, there's so many things, I don't know. Workforce development for great automation at Franklin Cummings Institute, electric vehicles, $1 million for tuition-free community college in Bunker Hill, $1 million at Dimmitt Community Health Center to combat substance use disorder. I could go on. If you all are interested, I have 2 members here from my district office team in the back, 2 men. I do hire those 2. And if you're interested in getting a full list of all of our community project funding investments, we're certainly happy to share that. And so if you don't mind, I did just want to make this very clear because it's important to me that as I said, please forgive me, I'm going to be partisan for a moment. I just am providing context. I want to make this very clear. I will work with anyone in the name of progress, but it is very challenging to have honest conversations with dishonest people. If people are not interested in negotiating in good faith, it makes it very challenging for me to advance those solutions that I think are really consistent with what you all are saying that you need. But I will sit at the table and work with anyone, Democrat, Republican, Independent, in the name of progress, because we should always prioritize people over politics. And so in that vein, since policy is my love language, I do want to share with you all that I am very proud that with more Republican co-sponsors than Democratic co-sponsors, that one of my bills was signed into law by President Biden. Not easy in this climate, and that is the Post-Disaster Mental Health Act. and it is to provide psychological first aid. It's a bill that I wrote in partnership with marathon bombing survivors who didn't have physical wounds but were unable to access behavioral health services. They had many psychological wounds. And unfortunately, given the growing number of extreme events that used to be anomalies with natural disasters, also domestic terrorism, school shootings, and the like, now because of this Post-Disaster Mental Health Act, all of those victims will be able to access behavioral and mental health services through FEMA.
For this special day, and I can't think of a better way to recognize Women's History Month with a woman who's making history and continues to make progress for all of us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.